A child arrived just the other day. He came into the world in the usual way, but there were planes to... When you come on home, son, I don't know when we'll get together then. You know we'll have a good time then.
Hello there, welcome to my channel. My name is Doug and I'm back with another fountain pen review. A couple of weeks ago I received this beautiful balsa wood box tied up with a lovely red ribbon. It's from a new company I'd never heard of before, from Hong Kong, called Hex Pens. And they have sent me this fascinating 3D printed fountain pen that has an intriguing transparent ink chamber that is shaped like a double helix of a strand of DNA. And it's called the Hex Pens DNA Evolved. I think the evolved in the title is very clever, as it references the evolution of man through DNA mutation and the evolution of the 3D printed pen, and specifically this pen's evolution from a similar double helix 3D printed pen from additive pens. This one does seem to have evolved, as there are some significant differences from its predecessor. So let's take a look at it right now. I was contacted by one of the partners of Hex Pens out of Hong Kong, China, about doing a review of one of their 3D printed pens called the DNA. And so I said, sure, that sounds great. They gave me a choice of nibs to get and told me they'd send me the pen. Well, that was a couple of months ago, and I promptly forgot about it. And a package came in the mail the other day, and I had no idea what it was. So I took it out of the box, and there was this lovely balsa wood box with a red ribbon tied around it. So I thought, now I remember. I also remember that this pen, this 3D printed pen from Hex Pens, is similar to a pen called additive pens that I've seen before. I've never had one in my hands, but it looks like it might be slightly different than that one. And again, I've never had an additive pen. They made the 3D printed DNA double helix kind of pattern first, but we'll take a look at this. As I said, it comes in a lovely balsa wood box with a ribbon, a red ribbon. So let's open it up. That side, and here's the very light wood box, and there's a card from Hex Pens, traditional today, Hex logo, and instructions. And the instructions have a scan code and an address. And it's really important to go to that address because there are some unusual things about this pen. So let's see, there's a foam insert. And we have the pen. It looks like some spare parts, a glass eyedropper, and the pen itself. So let's take a look at the pen. There's that double helix, hence the name DNA, and with this piston looking knob on the back, it looks like it is a piston filler, but it's not. That's a way to get into the ink chamber. And there's no clip. You can see it's sort of a frosty look on the inside. And there's the section made of that same black PLA of some variety. Very smooth threads. And a 1.1 stub. And it does look like you can unscrew this section, but that's where you need these instructions, because this unusually is a reverse thread, right hand clockwise turn to get that section off. And there's two rubber O-rings at the bottom of that, and there's the ink chamber. And then you can take this off, and that's a regular counterclockwise turn, another rubber O-ring, and this ring at the bottom, and there's the barrel. And then I'm going to do a video just filling this up with the eyedropper. Maybe I can't wait. And what I'd like to do today is go over the parts and features of this pen, show some size comparisons, some measurements, and then provide a writing sample. After the writing sample, please stay tuned as I will talk about what I like and what I don't like so much about this fountain pen. But before we get into the parts and features of this pen, I want to focus on the point that this pen is entirely short of the nib and feed, made by 3D printing. You almost forget that this is a 3D printed pen when you look at it. It's so smooth and the barrel is so clear, it really does feel like it's turned acrylic. Let's get close up with the camera here so you can see what I'm talking about. All the black parts of this pen are, I believe, made on an FDM printer, which is a 3-letter acronym for Fused Deposit Modeling. That is when a plastic PLA, or polylactic acid, is melted by the print head and the stream of molten plastic is piled up layer on layer. When you really get close up, you can start to see some of those layers that are in that cap. By contrast, look at the layer lines on this 3D printed pen stand that I had my son print for me on his 3D printer. You can see those stacks of PLA plastic. This is fairly raw. I didn't need it finished too finely, but you can see those layer lines built up there. So this pen stand is much lower resolution than the hex pen's cap and end finial. So kudos to the engineers that designed this model and controlled the process, because this is some of the finest 3D printing I've ever seen. I showed this pen to my son James, who prints all my Inkbuddy designs for me, prints them and sells them, and he was thoroughly impressed with this pen. And the barrel is the most remarkable part of this 3D printed pen. The plastic is nearly crystal clear. This clear barrel here has to have been printed in a resin printer. And here is the difference between something that is printed on an FDM printer and something that is printed on a resin printer. The Inkbuddy vial stabilizer on the left is PLA from an FDM printer. Layer on layer, you can actually feel that roughness. And again, this was a test print, so very, very rough, no sanding involved. But you can see those lines. Whereas this came out of the resin printer, and you can see it's transparent and it's very fine indeed. It's very difficult to see any lines in it at all, which is why I believe that this barrel is resin, whereas the cap and the end finial are FDM printed. The liquid resin printing process allows for a much smoother print. Plus the resin can be transparent, as we see here. It's cured with ultraviolet light and can yellow with age, so I'd recommend keeping this pen out of the direct sunlight. Keep in mind that these are 3D printed parts other than the nib, the feed, the metal ring here, and the silicone O-rings as we go through the parts and features of this fountain pen, and I think you will be as thoroughly impressed as my son James and I are with it. Overall, this is a fairly big pen. It's thick and relatively long.
And Leon's getting larger.
Here is my Pelikan M800 right next to it, and you can see that the Pelikan M800 is not a small pen by any means, and it is much larger than that pen. And here it is next to my Momento Zero Grande Leonardo, the Jonathan Brooks model, and that's a big pen. And it keeps up in size. It's just slightly shorter than that pen. The top of the cap has a domed shape, and if we look closely, we can see the layer lines, but they are so fine and so even. This is really beautifully done. The plastic filament used for the cap, the section, and the end cap isn't PLA, but something called POM, short for polyoxymethylene, often called Delrin or acetyl. POM is used where parts need to withstand friction with no wear, like the teeth of plastic zippers. It's very smooth and shiny, and I expect this has been given a high polish by hand. There's no clip or roll stop, and the cap tapers up about 3/4 of a millimeter over its length and is square cut at the end. There's an almost imperceptible step down to the clear plastic barrel, which is rounded off nicely right there where it meets the cap. The clear barrel, with its unique DNA double helix internal shape, is straight to the metal ring, and the tapering end cap, which has a matching domed end to it. It's worth mentioning that this internal DNA ink chamber is not possible in a single piece if this were made from a solid rod of acrylic. You'd be able to injection mold this if the barrel were in two pieces and then joined together. But through 3D resin printing, because it's built up in layers, these complex shapes can be realized. For example, the connecting rods between the double helix ribbons is very cool, and I don't believe the Additive Pens version has those connecting rods. In fact, I know that they don't. HexPen says that the plastic they use in these 3D printed barrels is a special resin that resists ink staining. The fact that you can take off the section and the end cap and you get the barrel all by itself means you can run water through it to clean it out very, very simply. You'll have to give that a try. The cap unscrews with 1 3/4 rotations to reveal the black tapering section with a small flare towards the end. It's the same POM material, those cap threads, which are very, very smooth, and the section is a nice girth and long enough as well. It's very, very comfortable. And then there is the steel number 6 size Bach 250 nib that has the hex motif pattern laser etched into it, the hex logo in the middle, and right down there 1.1 for the fact that this is a 1.1 italic. They call it an italic. It could be a stub. It actually writes more like an italic, and the black plastic feed. And another cool feature is the breather hole is a hexagon as well. That must have been an upcharge from Bach to Hex to get that breather hole into a hexagon. The nib and the feed are part of a nib assembly that unscrews easily from the section, and the nib pulls out of that collar very easily for swapping into another number 6 size nib if you wish. The inside of the cap shows a step that meets up with the section to seal the nib from drying out. I should mention that all the threads are all machined into the 3D printed material. These threads are not part of the 3D print model. The cap does not post as it goes over that end cap, but does not get past that ring. But the pen is plenty long enough to be comfortable in the hands. In fact, it's very comfortable this way. At this point, I'm going to cut to a video that I shot when I first put ink into the DNA Evolved, as I thought it would be cool to see that process. Plus, I give you a little Fountain Pen 101 lesson on why you should follow the instructions from Hex Pens and the very basics of how a fountain pen works. I thought it would be cool to see the ink going into this pen when you're filling it, going down into that DNA channel. And I finally decided to use one of my favorite inks, and this is the ink that is in the pen that does my sign on at the beginning of the videos, the Inquiring Minds thing. This is J. Urbain Kyanite du Nepal. It seems like a couple of people who have tried this pen out misunderstood the directions. So I've seen a couple of people take the end of the pen off and pour it in from the back. And of course, they had a bit of a mess on their hands. You fill the pen like an eyedropper, which is you take the section off and you eyedropper it down in here. But I thought I would demonstrate first sort of Fountain Pen 101, how a fountain pen works.
F-A-F, F-B-B, F-I-55, F-O-4, 55, O-F-U-Foo, 55, O-Foo.
By doing a demonstration here. So I'm going to use a straw and a piece of paper and a little bit of colored water to demonstrate what should be fairly natural to people, anybody who's used a straw before. And a fountain pen is kind of a simple device like a straw.
If you have a milkshake, and I have a milkshake, and I have a straw, there it is, that's a straw. My straw reaches across. I drink your milkshake.
So what I'm going to do is I'm going to suck up some ink into this straw. There. Now I got a little bit of ink in that straw, and you notice it's not coming out. And the reason it's not coming out is because I got my finger on the back. So think of the fountain pen the same way. If we have ink in it, but the back is closed, the ink won't fall out the front. The ink seeps through the nib, through what might be considered a controlled leak. That if I let a little bit of air out, will suck some ink out just through capillary action. And I'm still keeping my finger on that, but I'm able to draw because the ink is being drawn to the paper through capillary action. If I let go of my finger, then all of the ink is going to drop out at once. So if I actually eyedropper this with a syringe like this without holding it, it'll all just fall right out the bottom of the straw, just like that. So anyone who's used a straw should know those principles, and those principles work on this pen. So we're going to fill it from the top, not from the bottom, and then we're going to put the section back on, and the nib and the feed control the flow of that ink so it doesn't fall all the way out. And then it's going to be the nib drawing on the paper that draws the ink out of the nib onto the page through capillary action. But now we're going to take our ink, we're going to take our eyedropper that was included, and we're going to take the reverse thread top off this pen, suck up a good amount of ink, and then we're going to see how it goes into this pen. Put it in the other channel too. And I'm just going to fill it to the threads. That's what the instructions say. Don't fill it any more than the bottom of those threads. And reverse turn, close that up, and there we have our shimmering DNA of kyanite du Nepal. I think that looks rather nice. The next thing you have to do is wait for that ink to get down through the section.
Some viewers may find the following video disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised.
If you can't wait, you can dip the pen into your ink well, and that'll flood that feed. You can obtain this pen from Hex Pens directly for $149 US plus shipping. I'll link the address to that website in the description below. Before we look at some size comparisons, I'm going to insert a video that I shot removing this ink, cleaning the barrel out, and taking the pen to pieces. Since one of the things about this pen that's different than the additive pens is that you can separate that barrel from both ends to clean it out, I thought I'd disassemble it now that I've got it inked, unink it, clean it out, and show you how it works. In case I forget in my likes and dislikes, one of the things I noticed about this after using it for about a week or so is that that cap can get a little bit worn with scratches and things like that. You get various abrasions fairly easily on that textured cap. So let's take it apart, shall we? Now, the first thing is, this is a reverse thread, so we're going to righty-loosey and take that off and save this ink because this stuff ain't cheap, folks. There we go. And here we are at my sink. We'll run a little bit of water and just run it straight through that barrel. There, clean as a whistle. Took 2 seconds. So I'm back with all the pieces apart and the barrel freshly cleaned out. That cleaned up very, very nicely. 2 seconds under the tap and it's rinsed clean. And you just blow in this end and it blows all the moisture out of it. And then I took the nib collar apart, took the nib unit out of the section, and then took the nib and the feed out of the collar. I identified an extra O-ring. There's another one. So if we count them all up, there's 2 O-rings on the collar, there's 2 O-rings on the end cap, there's 2 O-rings on the section nozzle, 6 O-rings. So I don't think any silicone grease is required for this pen, but let's put it back together again, shall we? I always line these up so the shoulders of that curve on the nib on both sides lines up with the point of the feed, and then hold it together. And it's very hard to see, but there is a bit of a difference between the top and bottom. You can see it's wider at the top on that opening, and that's the little curve right there that you put the nib into, and it slides in very easy. Push it all the way in, and then we can put it back into the section, and then reverse thread. This goes on the barrel, and we're good to go. I'd say that's very simple. And here is the hex pen's DNA evolved with a Wiolin 017, a Leonardo Furore Grande, a Ranga 3C Ebonite, and an Opus 88 Bella. Now let's look at them posted. And here they are posted. And what you should notice is that between the hex pens section and the Wiolin 017 section, they're almost identical. The hex pen section is a little bit girthier, but they're almost the same shape. Now let's look at them unposted. And here they are unposted. In fact, most of these pens, if not all of these pens, rate better unposted. They become very big when they're posted. Now let's look at some measurements, and I'll be back with a writing sample. And we're back with the writing portion of the review. This is Clairefontaine 90 GSM paper, and this is the hex pens DNA evolved. And it has a number 6 size steel Bach number 250 nib. And let's check the wetness. It's decently wet, especially when you do the downstrokes on this very wide, broad nib. And the ink today is J. Urbain Kyanite du Népal with an accent grave. And this is a very, very nice teal ink that shades beautifully and has a silver shimmer to it. It's one of my favorite inks. It's the ink that you see in the opening credit of my videos where I write Inkquiring Minds. The nib is very smooth with a little bit of feedback, and it's a fairly crisp italic 1.1. Could be called a stub, but the line it's creating is fairly straight edged and crisp, and so it's feeling more like an italic than a very, very smooth stub. And the horizontal line it makes is 0.4 millimeters, and the vertical line it makes is a full 1.0 millimeters, which makes it a Western extra fine to double broad, or a Japanese fine to off the charts broad. As to line variation, well, you're not going to push this nib anyway. I got a little bit of a skip there. This pen was open for a bit while I was doing the size comparisons, but the ink does flow very nicely in this pen. But again, line variation, You're not going to push this pen because it gives you instant line variation the lazy way, just because it has a thin horizontal and a thick vertical. You're going to get line variation just by moving your pen in your script writing. And for our quote: and for some reverse writing: why on earth you would reverse write with a stub or an italic, I have no idea, but there you go. And for some quick writing: this pen has no difficulty keeping up whatsoever. So what do I like and what do I not like about this fountain pen? Well, there's a lot to like about this pen. Where the rubber hits the road or the ink hits the page is always the nib. I've had some iffy experiences with Bock nibs in the past, but this 1.1 stub, or italic, they call it an italic, as it writes a fairly crisp line that is a little crisper than a stub. And it's very, very nice on the page, as it gives my handwriting a little bit of flair. But even if I didn't like it, the fact that it is a standard size number 6 steel nib in a Bock nib collar means I could easily swap it out for another Bock, or if I pull the nib out of that collar, I could replace it with any nib that I want. I don't think I will, though, because I really like this nib. It's unfortunate the cap doesn't post. The cap weighs so little that it would not unbalance the pen if it did. And when you don't post the pen, putting the barrel aside on your desk means that it's going to roll away and probably live on the floor most of the time. So I have to put it upright on my desk like that so it won't roll away. Of course, I could put this little snake charm thingy that was on my Fully Wen 017 that I got from Doodlebud. I could put that on the cap, and that's not unattractive, and that would keep the pen from rolling away even when it's uncapped, just like that. Or a clip might be an idea for hex pens on this model. And I really like the size and girth of this pen. The section is great, and the barrel just fills my hand nicely. I can really write with this pen. It isn't heavy by any stretch. But the best thing about this pen is the double helix DNA strand inside the barrel. Seeing that shimmering ink inside the barrel is very, very cool. The fact that it is 3D printed and the stunning quality of the fit and finish of this 3D printed pen is just amazing. Is it worth $149? Considering the amount of time it would take to print both the FDM and resin 3D parts of this pen, and the hand labor it would take to polish these parts to this level of finish, not to mention the quality Bock steel nib, I think this is a bargain at this price. Will there be a controversy about this pen because it might appear to be a ripoff of the Additive Pens Double Helix? Probably. But they're very different pens, even though I've never held an Additive Pens Double Helix in my hands before. The Double Helix doesn't have the ladder-like rods that connect the Double Helix ribbons together to actually make it a DNA shape like the Hex Pens does. The Hex Pens DNA can be opened at both ends to be cleaned out easily under a faucet, and the Additive Pens cannot. And the Additive Pens Double Helix is a completely different size in length and girth, and a different shape with rounded finials rather than the DNA evolved. So you'd have to claim ownership of the rounded end fountain pen shape and the shape of a strand of DNA to be able to cry ripoff or knockoff. The Hex Pens team, they're actually two engineering students working together, have really come up with something unique and special here. And there you have it. Thank you to Hex Pens for providing this fascinating fountain pen for review. And if you like this video, please like and subscribe, and don't forget to ring that bell to get instant notifications whenever a new video is posted. And please look in the description for a link to Goldspot Pens, as I'm now an affiliate of the online store. And when you shop at Goldspot using the link in my description, you'll be supporting my channel as well at no extra cost to you. You can also join as a member of my channel for only 99 cents a month, and I guarantee I'll answer your questions, and you'll get cool emojis and badges and sneak peek unboxing videos as well. And that just leaves it for me to say, thank you. For watching. And that's all she wrote.
I made this.